Today we're beginning Mishnah 8. The Mishnah is a new set of zugot, a new set of pairs. We're down to the third generation of the pairs. There were a total of 5 sets of pairs. I'm going to put it on the screen for you. This third set of pairs is Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shattach. Shimon ben Shattach is possibly a little more well-known than Yehuda ben Tabai. We'll talk maybe a little more about him tomorrow. So they received Kiblu Mehem, they received the tradition from Nitai Harbeli and Yehoshua ben Prachia. And Yehuda ben Tabai Ome, Yehuda ben Tabai said, Al ta'as atzmecha k'orche hadayonin. Now, the translation for this differs. This one here says that do not act as an advisor to judges. Others actually translated to not act as a lawyer. Which we'll have to explain for the lawyers in this crowd, that it's talking, according to most understandings, we're actually talking to a judge, but we'll see it could be talking to someone else. But let's take the assumption for now that this is speaking to a person who is a judge and telling him, don't act like an advisor or don't act like a lawyer. And what exactly does that mean? So obviously there are different roles. You have 2 litigants generally in a case, and the judge. So Rashi, for example, says that if you're the judge, then you should not be giving either advice to one of the parties to tell them how to make their claims better. You can't do that. And even if you know the person's right, let's say you know that person's right, you're not allowed to give, as a judge, you're not allowed to give advice to one of the parties. Now there is a little exception to that. The exception would be that in a situation where one of the litigants has a deficiency. So, for example, they're minors. If they're minors. In case we call them orphans, it would be that's where they don't have parents to deal with it for them. So the court acts on their behalf in general. There's usually someone's appointed to be their we'll call it an executor. In Hebrew we say an apotropos, and the judge therefore could give them something to say. Well, you can make this claim, because they would not know what to claim in certain situations. So, but normally the judge is not allowed to give them advice as to what they should say or what they shouldn't say in order to plead their case. But also, a judge should not offer an opinion prior to the trial, says Rashi. He's quoting different sources that an opinion doesn't mean he's judging it yet. It means he tells one of the things, yeah, you got a good case. You're saying is good. You can't, and you certainly, and even when it comes time to give the decision, the rule is that both litigants have to be there. You can't tell the decision with only one litigant present. Now, the Rabbeinu Yonah points out, maybe it's obvious, that we're obviously not talking about a case of where we're telling somebody something false. We're talking about where you're helping somebody with something that you think is true. Because obviously you're not allowed to lie and be deceitful, so we don't need a special law about telling you about a judge acting like a lawyer or somebody acting in a certain way. He's not allowed to be dishonest. So we're talking about even when what you're saying is something that is valid, the judge cannot act as an advisor to others as well. Rabbeinu Yonah goes on to tell you that even if it's not a judge, a person is not allowed to offer unsolicited legal advice to one party if it's going to cause someone else to lose, right? Generally, what happens is you have 2 parties, you're arguing over money. So if I win, you lose, and vice versa. So a person from a third party can't just come over to me and say, oh, I see you have a case. I think, do this, that, or the other thing, and you're going to win. Because by helping me, they're hurting the other person. If it's a relative, so then there's exceptions to that rule. As long as if the person's trying to prevent me from losing money, then they're allowed to unsolicited. Obviously, if you hire someone to be your advisor or your legal advice, that's different. But we're talking about just you're sticking your nose in there and saying, "Oh, I think this person should be doing that or the other thing, and I'm going to help them." You can't do that if it's going to cause someone else a loss. And even if when you think that that's the way it should be, you think this person's right and the other person's wrong, you're not supposed to do that. Now, so far we're talking about the idea of the judge acting in that manner. Now, the word orche hadeyonim could be translated, as we said, as lawyer, and the other translation was as an advisor. Now, there is in a Jewish court, in a Beis Din, you don't have a lawyer like you have in a secular court. What you have is, we call it a toain, a claimer, someone who tells you what claims you should make. Because the way a Jewish court works is, I guess I'm not a lawyer, but you see a lot from books or TV type of thing. But because I haven't seen a case, real, even though I know lawyers, but the lawyer is going to be making claims and statements and basically trying to convince the judge to do a certain thing, besides asking the witnesses questions and all that. That's not how it works in a Jewish court. The judge would be asking the witnesses the questions. And there really isn't a concept of a lawyer. So you have really it's more of an advisor, that the person, because a lot is dependent on the claim of the litigant. And if the litigant knows how to make the right claim, then he can win. If he makes the wrong claim, even if he's right, he can lose, because you're not going to win unless you claim. So an advisor says, if you say this, if you say that, you make this claim, you make that claim, this is how you should approach it. And therefore, the judge ultimately is the one who's making all the decisions as to whether or not the claim is a good claim or not. And if there are witnesses, like I say, he's the one who's going to be asking. So the Rambam tells us that that's what Orche Hadayana means in this Mishnah. That is, people who would advise the litigants in how to answer the judge. If the judge asks you a question, what do you say? What's your claim? And that was the idea of an orech, an arranger. And that way the person would come into court, the litigant, with an ability to know, oh, this is what I say here, this is what I say there, this is how I approach things. Because sometimes, like I say, even if you're right, you could end up saying something in a certain way that blows your case. So it's not always a proof as to whether you're right or wrong based on how you say something. So a judge is not allowed to do that. The judge can't be the advisor for that type of thing. You can't say to the litigant, "Oh yeah, if you would say this, then your claim will stand." Irving Boone points out that we could also, another way of looking at it is, it's not talking about being the judge, it's talking to the people who appoint judges or have the power to hire judges. And so that type of person, you shouldn't, don't be influenced by those people who have the power to decide who is the judge. And he actually brings an interesting story from Baron Rothschild from back in the day, that Baron Rothschild had hired a rabbi for where he lived. And in those days, the rabbis were like, well, the judges, you'd come to the rabbi with a case if you had a problem. And so after he hired the rabbi, he came to him with a case. He brought another guy, a poor man. He was obviously very wealthy, and he brought a point and he had a case, and they argued the case. And the rabbi said to Baron Rothschild, it wasn't really a case, it was just a test, because you're the kind of rabbi I want. I want someone who is going to be not swayed by me, but in the fact that I am, powerful, I'm rich and all that, and I hired you. So the people who hire a judge sometimes have too much influence on what the judge is going to say. And I guess we see that in today's world as well. It shouldn't really make any difference. You hire a conservative judge, you hire a liberal judge. Like, a judge is a judge. It should be the law is the law. Somehow or other, the law isn't the law in some of the places we live. Okay, one other idea along these lines, and actually not along these lines, but in this concept is another take. It's not even talking, it doesn't have to be, you could take this message talking not about a judge, but about yourself, that self-judgment. that the Chida says that sometimes we like to we don't like to be wrong, so we have lots of ways of explaining how we're not wrong, right, to ourselves. And sometimes we could be very good at it, like a lawyer. We're lawyers. We come up with all good claims as to what we're doing is right. And he says, when judging ourselves, we should not act as our lawyer, which is going to be, the client. We're gonna make this client win no matter what. The goal is not to make yourself win. The goal is to get whether or not you're doing the right thing or not. And therefore, unless you want to, unless you're willing to face your own shortcomings, you're not going to become a better person. So don't act as your own lawyer in convincing yourself as to the fact that you're right in whatever every situation, because you need to be impartial when you're looking at your own behavior as well. And we will hold